My father stood up at the Christmas dinner table in the house I grew up in on the last Sunday in December, looked at me across the roasted chicken and the green bean casserole, and the candles my mother lit every year, regardless of whether there was anything worth celebrating, and delivered a speech. Not a toast, a speech. He said he needed to clear the air before the family went into the new year, carrying something that needed to be named. He said generosity was one of the things this family had always stood for, and that generosity had limits, and that those limits had been tested quietly and without complaint from him and from Patricia for the past 3 years. He said he had welcomed me back into his house when my company downsized and my apartment lease ended, had given me the room I grew up in and the meals and the utilities and the parking space in the driveway, and had asked nothing in return because that was what family did. He said it had been 3 years, and he felt it was important for the people at this table, my mother, my sister Nora, and her husband Dale, my father's brother Russell, and his wife Gwen, to understand what 3 years of carrying a grown adult who contributed nothing looked like from where he and Patricia were standing. He used the word freeloader once. He said it the way people say words they have been wanting to say, with a specific release, as though the word had been pressurizing a sealed space inside him for longer than he had wanted to hold it, and saying it had let something out. He said it, and he looked at me, and then he looked around the table at the people he had invited to witness the saying of it. I was 29 years old, sitting at my parents' Christmas table in the house I had moved back into when the company I worked for cut 40% of its workforce, and I had 4 weeks of savings and no plan B. My father had just called me a freeloader in front of 6 people. On the table to my right, within arm's reach, was a medium-sized gift box wrapped in brown paper and a red ribbon that had been delivered to the house 3 days earlier by an attorney named Lewis Park from a firm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, with a note that said it was from my grandmother Hazel and was to be opened by Callow alone, at her discretion, when the time felt right. I had been carrying the box with me for 3 days without opening it because I was not sure what was inside, and I was not sure I was ready. I looked at my father finishing his speech. I looked at the box. 3 years of a thing that needed to be said, he had told the table. 3 years of something he and Patricia had carried. I reached for the box, and I pulled the ribbon, and I opened it at the Christmas dinner table while everyone watched. Before I take you back to the beginning, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely stays with you. Drop your city and the time in the comments. I always love knowing where you're watching from. My name is Calavas. I'm 29 years old. I am a project coordinator at a nonprofit environmental organization in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is the job I found 14 months after my company downsized and my professional life reorganized around its absence. I am not a freeloader. I want to say that simply and without defense, as a fact that the contents of the gift box would make clear, and that I will describe precisely, because precision is the thing my grandmother Hazel valued above most others, and because this is her story as much as mine. This is the story of 3 years and a gift box, and what my grandmother had known and documented and prepared for, and what the Christmas dinner table looked like when the documentation arrived. Let me take you back to Durham, North Carolina. My parents' house on Larimer Street in a neighborhood that had the specific quality of a place that peaked 20 years ago and has been maintained carefully since. The house is good, the yards kept, the community of it still recognizable from what it had been even as the city changed around it. My father, Edwin Voss, had been a branch manager at a regional bank for 16 years before the bank was acquired, and Edwin took a position as a senior loan officer at a competing institution, where he had been working ever since, steady and without the particular ambition of his earlier career, which he described as having been resolved by the acquisition. He was a precise man about money in the way of people who spend their professional lives evaluating other people's financial decisions and who have, over decades of that evaluation, developed the specific confidence of someone who believes their judgment about money is reliable in all contexts. At work, that judgment was trained and disciplined. At home, it was applied to the family in ways that were less examined and more absolute, and the combination of precision and unexamined authority produced a man who could be generous when he chose to be and exacting when he chose not to be, and who had difficulty locating the line between the two. My mother, Patricia, had been a dental hygienist for 23 years and was the kind of woman whose warmth was real and whose backbone, when it mattered, was made available only under specific conditions. She was warm when the family was in agreement and quiet when Edwin was not. She had been quiet at the Christmas dinner table while he gave his speech. She had not said stop or that's enough or Edwin, please. She had been looking at the green bean casserole with the expression of someone who knows exactly where the train is going and has decided the best response is to be somewhere else in her attention while it gets there. My sister Nora was 5 years older than me, 34, a marketing manager in Charlotte who had left Durham at 22 with the specific momentum of a first child who understood early that leaving was available to her and that the leaving should be decisive. She had married Dale Hutchins, a commercial real estate broker, and they lived in a neighborhood in South Charlotte in a house that they had purchased at 31 with a down payment that Edwin had contributed $25,000 toward, which was described to the family at the time as an investment in the next generation, and which I had understood from the moment I heard it as the kind of investment that was also a message about which daughter Edwin believed in enough to materialize that belief in 5 figures. I had been 26 when Nora and Dale bought the house. I had been working as a logistics coordinator at a shipping company, and I had been fine, and I had not needed $25,000, and the fact that I had not needed it did not diminish the fact that no equivalent investment had ever been proposed for me. I noted this the way I noted most things about the specific arithmetic of my family, carefully, without making the noting a confrontation, filing it in the place where things go when you understand them but are not yet ready to name them. The layoff came when I was 26. The shipping company cut 40% of its workforce over 2 quarters, starting with the logistics division. And I received my notice on a Tuesday afternoon in October with 4 weeks of severance, and the specific quality of calm that arrives when something you feared has happened and the fearing is over. I had $11,000 in savings. My apartment lease was up in November. The severance would not carry me far in a rental market that had moved significantly since I had last been in it. I called my parents. Edwin answered and listened and said they had room and that I should come home until I had something stable, that there was no rush, that this was what the house was for. He said it with the warmth of a man who is being generous because it costs him nothing yet. I moved into my childhood bedroom in November, and I began looking for work. What happened over the next 3 years is the story that Edwin had a version of the version he delivered at the Christmas dinner table in December, and the story that the gift box contained a different version of. I want to tell you both. Edwin's version. Calla moved in at 26, received shelter and meals and utilities at no cost, found a job after 14 months that paid her adequately, and remained in the house for another 18 months after that, continuing to receive the same accommodations without financial contribution, and had at no point offered to pay rent or to move out. And the accumulation of this, 3 years of a grown adult choosing the comfortable option over the responsible one, was what he described at the Christmas table as freeloading. What was true in Edwin's version? I moved in at 26. I found a job after 14 months. I stayed for the following 18 months. What was missing from Edwin's version? Everything else. Let me tell you about Hazel. Hazel Voss was my father's mother. She was 78 years old and had lived for the past 11 years in a 1-bedroom apartment in a senior living complex in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, 40 minutes from Durham. She had been a librarian for 31 years and had the specific quality of a librarian who had spent 3 decades watching what people chose to read and had concluded that attention was the most valuable thing a person could give and that most people rationed it poorly. She was sharp and dry and had the humor of someone who has outlived most of her expectations and found the outliving interesting rather than melancholy. She called me every Wednesday at 6 p.m. She had started calling on Wednesdays when I moved back to to Durham, because she said a granddaughter in a hard stretch needed a fixed point in the week that she could count on. I always answered. In January of the year after my layoff, 14 months before I found my job at the nonprofit, I was at her apartment for a Wednesday visit, sitting in the chair she kept beside the window that looked out at the complex's central garden, when she told me something she had not told Edwin. Her home health aide, a woman named Dora, who came 3 mornings a week, had not been coming for the past 6 weeks. Edwin had been paying Dora directly and had told Hazel he was going to cut back on the 8 hours because things were tight, and he thought Hazel was doing well enough to manage with less help. She had not pushed back because she did not want to be a burden. I looked at my grandmother in her chair by the garden window, and I understood several things at once that Edwin had decided, without consulting Hazel's physician or Hazel herself, that the 8 hours were discretionary, that Hazel had been managing without them because she would rather struggle than ask her son to reverse a decision he had already made, and that the specific way she said burden, carefully, as though she had examined the word before using it and confirmed it was the correct one, told me this had been her private calculus for some time. I asked Hazel what Dora's hours had cost before Edwin cut them. She told me. I did the math. Then I said, I'll cover it. Hazel said I was not in a position to cover anything, which was accurate and which I understood, and which did not change my answer. I told her that I had 11 months of severance and savings remaining, and that $1,400 a month was something I could manage if I was careful, and that her having help 3 mornings a week was not something I was willing to negotiate around. I said it plainly because she was a woman who received plain sentences better than managed ones. She looked at me for a long moment with the expression she used when she was deciding whether someone was telling her the truth or telling her the version they needed her to hear. Then, you can't tell Edwin. He'll turn it into a conversation I don't want to have. I told her I would not tell Edwin. Or Patricia, she added. I said I would not tell Patricia. She reached out and held my hand for a moment, which Hazel did not do with frequency, and then she released it and looked back out at the garden. Dora starts Monday, she said. That was the end of the conversation. For 24 months, from that January to the following January, which was 3 months before Hazel died, I paid Dora's fees from my savings, and then, after I found my job, from my salary. $1,400 a month. $33,600 over 2 years. I did not tell Edwin. I did not tell Patricia. I did not tell Nora. Dora knew. Hazel knew. Lewis Park, Hazel's attorney in Chapel Hill, knew because Hazel had told him, and because Hazel had asked him to document it in the way that people who have been librarians and who understand the importance of accurate records ask attorneys to document things. Hazel died in September, 3 months before Christmas. She died in her apartment on a Tuesday morning with Dora present, which was the way she had wanted, not in a hospital, not connected to anything, in the chair by the garden window, where she did her reading. Edwin handled the estate administration, such as it was, the apartment's contents, the small brokerage account, the arrangements. He did it efficiently and without visible grief, which I understood as the grief of a man who does not allow his grief to be visible rather than the absence of it. He did not mention Dora during any of the estate conversations. He did not mention Hazel's care costs. He did not mention Lewis Park, which was the first time I realized that Hazel had kept Lewis Park specifically separate from Edwin. Lewis Park called me in October 6 weeks after Hazel died. He said Hazel had left instructions for him to contact me directly, and that he had a package she had prepared before she died, and had asked him to deliver to me personally at the address she had given him, which was my parents' address on Larimer Street. He delivered it in the first week of December. He handed it to me at the front door while my father was at work, and he said, "She wanted you to have this. She said you would know when to open it." He did not elaborate. He shook my hand and got back in his car and drove away. I carried the box inside and put it on the desk in my childhood bedroom. I carried it to the Christmas dinner table 3 weeks later because something told me to keep it close, the way you keep close the things that might be needed. Now, I want to stop and ask you something directly, because this is the question I have been asked by every person I have told this story to, and the room always divides. If you had been sitting at that Christmas dinner table, and your father had called you a freeloader in front of 6 people, would you have opened the box right there and let whatever was inside speak for itself? Or would you have waited, carried the knowledge privately, had the conversation in a room with fewer witnesses? Tell me in the comments. Both choices are real. Both choices cost something. The choice I made was the one Hazel had prepared for, because she had known her son for 61 years, and she had a specific sense of which version of the conversation needed an audience. Inside the box were 4 things. The first was a letter in Hazel's handwriting, the careful, upright cursive of a woman who had spent 3 decades writing call numbers and catalog entries, and who believed that the physical act of writing was worth the time it required. The letter described, in 11 pages of precise and ordered prose, the following: the conversation in January 2 years earlier when Hazel had told me about Dora, my offer to cover the costs, her acceptance, Edwin's original decision to reduce Dora's hours, and the reasoning he had given. Things were tight at the bank. He had thought Hazel could manage. He had not consulted her doctor. The 24 months of payments Calla had made, and what they had meant to Hazel's daily life and her ability to stay in the apartment she had lived in for 11 years rather than transitioning to a facility that Edwin had mentioned twice as a possibility. The letter described what 3 mornings a week of help from Dora had looked like in practice, not as abstraction, but as specific reality. The shower she could not safely take alone, the medication management she needed eyes on, the 40 minutes of companionship on Tuesday and Thursday mornings when the garden was at its best and Dora would sit with her by the window, and they would talk about whatever was in the news. The letter said, Calla covered this when Edwin decided he could not. She did it without telling Edwin, because I asked her not to, and she honored that request for 2 years without complaint. That is not what a freeloader looks like. I know what a freeloader looks like because I raised one briefly, and he corrected himself in his 30s. Calla is not that. The second thing was a set of bank records. Hazel had requested them from Lewis Park and had included them. 33 months of payments from my account to Dora's service, printed clearly, dated, totaling $33,600. My name, the amounts, the dates, the specificity of 2 years of a decision I had made at 27 years old while my severance was running, and I had not yet found work. The third thing was a cashier's check. It was drawn on Hazel's estate account at a credit union in Chapel Hill, and it was made out to Calla Marie Voss for the sum of $33,600, which Lewis Park had prepared at Hazel's direction in the months before she died, at the point when she had understood that she was not going to have the energy to have this conversation with Edwin herself, and had decided the check was a better way to have it. Below the amount, in the memo line, in Hazel's handwriting, repayment in full, with love. The fourth thing was an index card, also in Hazel's handwriting. It said, "You are not a freeloader. You are the person who showed up when the person who was supposed to couldn't be bothered. Keep the check. Do something that matters with it. I love you, Hazel." I read the index card out loud at the Christmas dinner table. I read it in the voice I use at work when I am presenting information that needs to be heard clearly without performance, without the emotional coloring that makes some people focus on the feeling rather than the fact. I read it, and then I set it down on the table, and I looked at my father. Edwin had the expression of a man looking at something he does not yet fully understand, but is beginning to. His mouth had opened slightly when I read the line about the person who was supposed to. He had understood that sentence. It had not required explanation. Patricia was very still. She had not touched her green bean casserole for the past several minutes, and she did not touch it now. Nora was looking at the bank records, which I had passed to her, when I finished reading the letter. She was reading them with the specific attention of someone who is doing arithmetic and confirming that the arithmetic is what she thinks it is. She set them down slowly and looked at Dale, and then looked at Edwin. Russell, my father's brother, was the first person to speak. He said, "Edwin, did you know about this?" Not as an accusation, as a genuine question from a man trying to understand the geometry of what had just been laid on the table. Edwin said he had not known. His voice had the quality it got when he was managing something he had not prepared to manage. Gwen, Russell's wife, was looking at the index card. She reached across and picked it up and read it again and set it down carefully, like something that needed to be handled with care. I slid the cashier's check across the table so Edwin could see the amount and the memo line. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then he looked at me with the expression of a man who has just understood the shape of a thing he said an hour ago and what that thing cost him to say. I said, "That's $33,600 I paid toward Grandma Hazel's care over 2 years. From my savings and then from my salary. I paid it because she needed it and because you had stopped paying it. I didn't tell you because she asked me not to. I am telling you now because you called me a freeloader at your Christmas table in front of your family, and she left me a document that explains exactly what I was doing while you had that opinion of me." Edwin was quiet for a long time, long enough that Russell looked at the table and Gwen folded her hands, and Patricia finally looked up from the casserole and looked at her husband with the expression of a woman waiting to see which version of him was going to respond. Edwin said, "She had Dora back." "For 2 years," I said. "I didn't know she'd gone without." "She didn't want to tell you. She was afraid of being a burden." His jaw worked for a moment. He looked at the letter in Hazel's handwriting. He said, "And I want to be precise here because it was the most honest sentence my father had produced in my presence in a long time. I made a decision about her care without asking her whether she needed what I was cutting. And I didn't follow up." He said it to the table, not to me, as though he was confirming an accounting error he had been looking at and finally accepting as real. Patricia reached across and put her hand on Edwin's arm, not to comfort him, to hold him steady, the way you hold a person still when you need them to remain in a difficult place long enough to finish what needs to be said there. Nora, from her end of the table, said, "I need to think about this." She said it quietly and specifically, and it was the most useful sentence anyone at the table said in the next 10 minutes because it named what the room actually needed. Not more talking, but the specific work of processing what the documents had revealed, and what that revelation cost everyone at the table in different and individual ways. We sat with dinner that had gone cold and the box on the table between us, and the silence that follows when a family has been required to look at the accurate picture of itself, and is still in the early moments of deciding what that picture means. Let me tell you where everyone is now. The cashier's check is in my account. I deposited it in January, and I have been thoughtful about what Hazel meant when she said to do something that matters with it. I have put $20,000 into an investment account with a long time horizon. I have used $8,000 to furnish the apartment I moved into in February. The apartment I found when I was ready to find it, not when I was shamed into finding it. The remaining $5,600 I have held while I think about what Hazel would have recognized as the right use, which I believe I am close to understanding. I moved out of Larimer Street in February, 3 months after Christmas. The move was not a flight. I had been planning to move when I was financially stable, which I had become, and the December dinner accelerated the timeline, but did not change the direction. I left the house on a Saturday morning with a moving truck and 2 friends, and my father helped me carry the bookcase down the stairs without either of us being asked whether the help was welcome. He simply appeared at the top of the stairs when I was calculating the angles, and he took the other end. That was something. Edwin and I have spoken 6 times since Christmas. The calls are not long, and they are not yet honest in the way that honesty requires practice to produce. They are the calls of 2 people who are aware that something significant shifted in December, and who have not yet found the language for what comes next. On the 3rd call, in March, Edwin said he had been thinking about what Hazel wrote about him in the letter. He said he had read it 3 times. He said, "She called me a freeloader, briefly. She said I corrected it in my 30s. He said, "I don't think I corrected it as completely as she believed." He said, "I've been sitting with that." I told him I heard it. That was the sentence I had most needed from him. And it had arrived in March in the kind of quiet, careful voice of someone who has been working on a thing for a while. I received it. Patricia called on a Tuesday evening in January. Her call had the quality of a woman who has spent a month understanding that her silence at the Christmas table costs something, and who has decided the cost has to be named. She had not spoken when Edwin gave his speech, she told me, because she did not have a habit of speaking when Edwin made declarations at the table, and she understood that the habit was part of the problem. "I knew you were not a freeloader. I knew it the whole time he was talking. I said nothing." She was sorry, not the general sorry, but the specific one. She had watched me sit at that table and receive that word, and had not offered me anything. I told her thank you. I told her that was the apology that meant something, and I was glad she had called to give it. Nora called the following Friday, and the call was 2 hours covering things we had not covered in years. She had done the arithmetic on the $25,000 down payment contribution Edwin made for her house, and what it meant in the context of what she now knew, that I had been paying $1,400 a month from my savings while my severance ran. I didn't think about that at the time. "I should have," she said. She was not going to pretend the comparison was comfortable. I told her it wasn't, but that her seeing it was the thing that mattered. We talked for another hour about our parents and what we understood about them and what we were choosing to do with that understanding. The most honest conversation Nora and I had ever had, which is a thing that sometimes requires a December dinner and a gift box to produce. That's something. Dora sent me a card in November, the month after Hazel died, before any of the rest of this happened. The card had a watercolor of a garden on the front, and on the inside Dora had written, "She talked about you every Tuesday and Thursday. She said you were the one who showed up." I keep the card in the same drawer where I keep Hazel's index card, the one from the box. They are the same sentence from 2 different people who had been paying attention. Lewis Park sent a closing letter in February when the estate administration was complete. He noted in a personal postscript that Hazel had told him, at their final meeting in August when she had known she was declining, that she was glad the box was ready and that she trusted Calla to know the right moment. He said she had described the right moment as the one where it would be most useful, not the one where it would be easiest. He said he thought she had been correct about that, as she generally was about most things. She was correct. Here is what I want to say before I go. There is a specific kind of knowledge that a person accumulates when they have been called the lesser version of themselves by the people who were supposed to know them best. The knowledge that they are wrong. The knowledge that the gap between what they say you are and what you actually are is the truest measure of the distance between their understanding and the reality. For 3 years, my father's understanding of me was that I was someone who took without giving. The reality was that I was giving $1,400 a month to a woman he had decided could manage on less, and keeping that giving private because the woman I loved had asked me to. The gap between his understanding and the reality was documented in Hazel's handwriting across 11 pages, and in 33 months of bank records, and in a cashier's check with a memo line that said what it said. I did not need the gift box to know that Edwin was wrong. I had known Edwin was wrong the entire time. What the gift box gave me was not the knowledge. It gave me the documentation, and the documentation gave me the public moment. And the public moment was the one Hazel had decided was necessary because she had lived with her son for 61 years and understood that private corrections produce private understanding, and that Edwin's understanding needed to be corrected in the room where the error had been made. She prepared the box before she died. She gave Lewis Park specific instructions. She timed the delivery so that the documentation would be in my possession for the Christmas gathering she knew would happen, because Christmas gatherings on Larimer Street had happened every year for 3 decades, and she had seen enough of them to understand their texture and to predict, with the accuracy of a woman who had spent her working life cataloging information, what was likely to be said at the one that would happen 6 weeks after she was gone. She was not there to hand me the box. She prepared it so that I could hand myself the box at the right moment. That is the specific form that love takes when it has been watching carefully for a long time. It prepares the documentation. It trusts the person to read the room. It writes the index card in the handwriting that the person will recognize across a table in December. And it leaves the rest to the moment. Trust the moment. Open the box. Read the index card out loud. My name is Calavas. I am 29 years old. My father called me a freeloader at his Christmas dinner table in front of 6 people. On the table within arm's reach was a gift box from my grandmother who had been dead for 3 months, who had paid attention for 2 years and documented what she saw and had it ready for exactly this occasion. I reached for the box. I pulled the ribbon. I read the index card out loud in the voice you use when information needs to be heard clearly. My father looked at the letter in his mother's handwriting. He said the most honest sentence he had said to me in a long time. It arrived in March. I received it. Hazel had been right about the timing. She was generally right about most things. Thank you for staying until the very end. If someone prepared something for you, a letter, a document, a box with a ribbon, that arrived at exactly the right moment, drop a comment. Tell me what was inside. I read every single one. If this story found you in a moment where someone has called you the lesser version of yourself and the documentation of what you actually are is somewhere in a drawer or a folder or a box waiting to be opened, share it with the person who needs to hear that Hazel prepared the box before she died and trusted you to know the right moment. The right moment arrives. Open it, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.